Hello and welcome to Sideline Story, your destination for sports news, analysis and discussions. I'm Yang Guang, and today we are talking about the underdog story of island country of Cape Verde, now a FIFA World Cup newcomer. How did they get World Cup tickets? What can other nations learn from their blueprint? And what does their success tell us about the future of international football, especially as the World Cup itself gets bigger? To unpack the questions, I'm joined here with my fantastic co-hosts Tian Yu and Brandon Yates. Alright, let's start with one of the best stories lately in international football, Cape Verde. This small island country has made history by qualifying for its first ever World Cup. For a country with a population smaller than many cities in China, this is a monumental achievement. So, Tianyu, how do you analyze their World Cup entry? And what do you think is Cape Verde's success story? Because we know they are in the same group with the traditionally stronger side, Cameroon. We know Cameroon has many European-based players like Mbemo, Onana, and Choupo-Moting. So what do you think is Cape Verde's winning formula to qualify for the World Cup?
Yeah, I think it's honestly one of the coolest stories in football right now, because Cape Verde is a country with just over 500,000 people, and it has made it to the World Cup for the very first time. And to put that into perspective, I mean, my hometown is a little county in Jiangxi, and it probably has more people than the whole country. So imagine that a place that wouldn't even count as a county in China just did something that our country, our national team, hasn't managed in 20 years. That was just so crazy.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yes, and what makes it even more amazing is that Cape Verde didn't even have a proper football stadium until 2013. And that one was actually built with help from China.
Yeah.
I think their rise really comes down to smart player recruitment. I mean, as a former Portuguese colony, a lot of Cape Verdeans live in Portugal and other parts of Europe. Many of their national team players were born or raised there, playing solid football leagues like Portugal, Turkey, and the Netherlands. So because Cape Verde allows dual citizenship, it's been much easier for them to bring in talented players who still have that Cape Verdean connection. So, I mean, of course, the expanded World Cup format also played a role. I mean, more spots means more opportunities for smaller teams to shine. But that win over Cameroon, I mean, whose squad is worth like 15 times more, wasn't just sheer luck. It showed that Cape Verde really earned their place. So it is a country that players might not have the raw explosiveness of West Africa or African teams, or the tactical depth of North African sides, but they play with discipline, with unity, and with a lot of resilience. Their counter-attacking football is very sharp, organized, and full of belief. I think it's the perfect example of how teamwork and determination can take you to places that no one expected.
Right. Tian Yu just made the comparison of what a country it is for Cape Verde. I have my version here. For those who are not familiar with this country, Cape Verde is a very small country to the west of the Africa continent, comprised of a dozen of islands. Its size equals to 1/4 of the city of Beijing. Cape Verde has less than 600,000 population. By comparison, my hometown, Baotou, a fourth-tier city in China, has over 2 million people.
Crazy.
So, yeah, their qualification for the FIFA World Cup is truly a miracle. Brandon, how is African media describing this milestone, and how do you analyze their World Cup entry?
So before I get into Cape Verde's success in qualifying for the FIFA World Cup, I also want to touch on South Africa's qualification, which has also just been absolutely praised in this country, and rightfully so, because we haven't qualified since the 2010 FIFA World Cup, and of course we qualified through that from hosting. So to have our national team qualify for the 2026 World Cup is absolutely immense. But Cape Verde's performance, I mean, such a small nation, almost unheard of on the international stage, but they've been quietly going about their business. And in African media and in media across the entire globe, it's being rightfully praised. I mean, African and Portuguese language media have been talking about the qualification as, a fairy tale and historic and David versus Goliath sort of scenario. And of course, there's been massive celebrations in the country itself and the streets, flag waving crowds, the government declaring holidays and all sorts of things happening before the competition even begins. And rightfully so. I think, for so many nations, including, my home nation, South Africa, just qualifying for the World Cup is such a massive achievement in itself, even with the, expanded formats and all of that sort of thing. Qualifying for a showpiece event like the FIFA World Cup is a phenomenal achievement. So huge congratulations to Cape Verde. And they've been doing good things. I mean, the local press have talked about, the unity between overseas-based players and island players and investments being made in the national team in a kind of sort of steady way, but not super flashy or super immediate. It's kind of been like a relatively like annual growth sort of strategy, which has been interesting to watch. Of course, a lot of credit going to the coach for building cohesion, belief, and tactical discipline, which I think particularly at a national level is incredibly important, but also very difficult to do because, as we've touched on in different podcasts, it's very difficult to keep a core squad together that are based all over the world. Look, I don't think it's magic. I would say, it's smart organization. I would say they've identified past weaknesses. They've really structured their recruitment very well and they've improved their federation infrastructure. They leveraged the format change to, in terms of the qualification sets to, have more realistic qualification outcomes. And they've built a strong identity as a group rather than relying on individual stars, which I think for smaller nations is particularly important. Their depth, of course, is still incredibly limited compared to some of their counterparts. But, if they manage to sustain these performance levels, look, I mean, no one's expecting them to break records or do anything spectacular at the World Cup. I think their World Cup victory is qualification. But that being said, achieving that, in my personal belief, is like winning a World Cup for a nation, that is so small and hasn't achieved anything in their football history. So I think it's going to be great for the World Cup to have, these smaller nations out there giving their absolute all and facing some of the greatest players and greatest teams in the world.
Right. Cape Verde's success is particularly fascinating to Chinese fans. We in China have dreamed for years to see our national team, reach the World Cup again after 2002. China also has invested massively in football development with a clear goal of reaching the World Cup. So, Tianyu, if we take a closer look at the Cape Verde case here, is there any takeaway for Team China's efforts in reaching the World Cup again?
Yeah, I think Cape Verde's story just gives China a lot to think about when it comes to developing football and chasing that World Cup dream. I mean, China has tried the naturalization strategy too. We've been bringing foreign players to boost the national team, but the results haven't lived up to our expectations yet. One big reason, I would say, is the numbers. I mean, we've only had a handful of naturalized players like Alcacer or Goulart, and even though their peak level might have been higher than that most of the Cape Verde players, but there just weren't enough of them to make a real difference in the squad. I mean, for Cape Verde, naturalization isn't just a strategy. It's kind of a part of their system. And they have this huge group of players born or raised abroad who still feel deeply connected to their roots. And that gives them a natural advantage. For China, that model don't fit in our country because our foundation isn't there yet. We can't just rely on quick fixes like importing talent. I think what we need to do right now is, I want to avoid the cliche, but we still need to build from the ground up. I mean, with youth development, better coaching, and a stronger football culture. And that takes time, patience, and consistency. So what Cape Verde really teaches us goes beyond tactics. It's about identity. I mean, we've seen their players belong to that team because before the matches, they would sing in their language before games, and they would even dance their traditional dances. So when you have that shared sense of belonging, naturalization isn't just paperwork. I think it's something that gives the team its soul. So we've seen in China that we've been throwing money at buying players that just doesn't create roots. So you can bring in stars, but if there is no cultural connection, no sense of home, I think it all falls apart just all of a sudden. And Cape Verde shows exactly the opposite. Their unity, their discipline, and their resilience actually come from a shared story, not a contract.
Right. China have naturalized many players like Alan, like Icus, and you mentioned, but it seems like they have never been
Yes.
truly integrated into the team because of the language barriers, the cultural thing, the habit, lifestyle thing. And another thing is that all the naturalized players China have recruited are almost the players in the latter stages of their career.
Yeah.
Like Alan is 30 plus years old, Ikerson also. They haven't, spent the time truly with the players within the national team to grow together.
Yeah.
I doubt the chemistry is there. I doubt their, determination is there. But for Cape Verde, these are not problems.
Yeah, it's a different story there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Cape Verde's success story is very inspiring, but I don't see a quite similar path for China going forward because of different contexts. I mean, for Cape Verde, their model is deeply rooted in its unique historical context. And like you said, as a former Portuguese colony,
Yeah.
Cape Verde has this deep cultural and familial ties with Portugal. Like, I know Portuguese star Nani's parents are actually from Cape Verde.
Yeah.
Even Cristiano Ronaldo is
Yeah.
1/8 of Cape Verdean. I mean, when talented players with these heritage links cannot represent the already star-packed Portuguese national football team, Cape Verde becomes an alternative to realize their World Cup dreams.
Yeah.
Actually, 17 of the 27 Cape Verde national team players are naturalized, many with experience in European leagues. Of course, the credits must be given to the head coach and the federation for forging this diverse talent into a cohesive unit. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a success story based on naturalizing overseas players.
Yeah.
But for China, yes, we have naturalized one or two players, but we still predominantly rely on our homegrown players now. The path going forward, I would say, is different. So I think it's invalid to compare population and ask if Cape Verde can do this, why can't China? They are two totally different contests.
Yeah.
But there are certain takeaways I think Team China can draw lesson from Cape Verde's case here in reaching the World Cup. I think, for example, we should send more homegrown players overseas, especially in European leagues, to raise their level, because we know a lot of Cape Verde players have European leagues experience. And another thing is that we should embrace this, tactical humility. Cape Verde is known for playing ugly, defense first football, but it works.
Yeah. Practical.
Yeah, very practical. I think against Asian opponents, Team China can also learn to be more pragmatic, more organized, and play more effective underdog football.
Defensively,
Yeah.
basically.
I mean, Cape Verde's roster is not something we can copy, but their game ethos is definitely something we can learn from. So, Brandon, what do you think? Any lessons Team China can draw from Cape Verde's success in reaching the World Cup finals?
When you look at the success of Cape Verde in terms of their qualification, I think it is kind of a once in every generation sort of achievement that can be attributed to numerous factors and can't be really, explained in like 3 to 5 key points. And in that sense, it could also be something that is very difficult to be replicated on a consistent basis, or a model for, any aspiring football nation like China to try and replicate in a highly successful, highly similar fashion. So, I think it is something that can be looked at, but maybe not too intensely in terms of something that can be, used for future success. But I mean, that being said, there are definitely some key lessons that can be looked at and possibly replicated going forward. So some of my key takeaways that I would maybe encourage football officials and coaches and players in China to kind of take a look at. I think number one is systemic youth development, over short-term signings. I think that's something that China is actually actively doing across a variety of sports where they want to, really raise their profile. And I think that has proven to be successful for Cape Verde and for, numerous small and major countries in football or any sport around the world, prioritizing grassroots level development and, doing the best that you can from the beginning as opposed to, plugging holes and, short-term solutions. You have to look at the long term if you want long-term success. I think that's very important. Also, the effective recruitment of, internationally based and locally based players. I think that's also something Cape Verde has done very well. And I think China has also kind of taken that on even before Cape Verde took it on. So I think that's very important. And then, looking at things on the field, just having set principles and ways of going about doing things that give your national team, that stamp, that identity. Something that has also brought many club football teams great success. Manchester United in the 90s, Barcelona of the early to mid 2000s, even Chelsea in the 2000s that had the park the bus label placed on them. These were identities that people agreed with or disagreed with, but they were effective and became synonymous with those teams, and players and coaches that were brought in kind of stuck with those principles. And I think that's important to build that long-term cohesion. But for me, I think the biggest takeaway I would say is having that national identity in terms of a style of play that is implemented from the grassroots all the way to the senior level. And I think that's something that China needs to prioritize going forward.
All right, before we move on, here's a quick review of the biggest sports headlines in China and around the world for the past week. Valentin Vetcherol beat his cousin Arthur Rinderknecht to win the Shanghai Masters for the first title of his career after a stunning run from the qualifying rounds. Ranked outside World 200, Vetcherol became the lowest-ranked tournament winner in ATP Masters 1000 history and the first from Monaco.
I have no idea what's happening right now. I'm not in a dream. It's just crazy. Sharing this, I know it's really tough. There has to be one loser, but I think there's just two winners today, one family that won.
Vetcherol has stunned 24-time Grand Slam champion Novak Djokovic to reach the final. He has broken inside the top 50 in the ATP rankings. Coco Gauff has won the Wuhan Open to claim her third WTA 1000 title. The French Open champion defeated fellow American Jessica Pegula 6-4, 7-5 in the final.
No, like you said, winning in almost every match in straight sets is I don't know if I've done that before on a title run, so it's pretty special and it means a lot to be here holding the trophy today.
Gauff says she will take a short break before gearing up for the WTA finals, where she will look to defend her title from last season. Three-time world snooker champion Mark Williams became the oldest winner of a ranking event after he thrashed Sean Murphy 10-3 in the final of the Xi'an Grand Prix in China.
I don't practice nowhere near as much as I used to or should do to try and win tournaments, but somehow I'm stood here again with another trophy, so it's incredible really, and I don't pat myself on the back too much, but I think I will after this one.
50-year-old Williams has moved above Ronnie O'Sullivan into fourth in the world rankings. Cape Verde has made football history qualifying for the FIFA World Cup for the first time after a stunning 3-0 win over Eswatini. The island nation is the second smallest country ever to reach the World Cup, after Iceland in 2018. England has become the first European country to seal a place at next year's World Cup finals, with a commanding 5-0 win over Latvia, securing top spot in Group K. England remains unbeaten in 6 qualifiers, scoring 18 and conceding none. China swept both the men's and women's titles with identical 3-0 victories in the finals of the Asian Table Tennis Team Championships in India. After edging Japan 3-2 in the dramatic men's semi-final, China carried that momentum into the final against Hong Kong, China, to successfully defend its men's team crown. In the women's team final, China continued its dominance with a commanding 3-0 win over defending champion Japan. Former NBA Most Valuable Player Russell Westbrook will sign a contract with the Sacramento Kings, his 7th NBA team. Reports say Westbrook agreed to sign a 1-year minimum salary deal. Welcome back. The expanded 48-team World Cup is almost upon us, and it's precisely designed to give teams like Cape Verde a better shot at qualification. But this brings up a classic debate. Are we trading quality for inclusivity? Yes, we would see more Cinderella stories like Cape Verde story, but could we also see more lopsided games for the World Cup group stages that could harm or damage the intensity or the quality of the tournament?
Yeah, I actually agree. I think expanding the World Cup format is actually a double-edged sword. When you bring in more teams, especially from those smaller countries, the overall gap, like you said, between the powerhouses and underdogs would definitely get wider. I will probably see more one-sided games in the group stage, and that's just part of the trade-off. And it definitely, undermine the quality of the game. Fans may get bored to see these one-sided games. But on the other hand, I think that's also what makes football so beautiful. You never know when an upside might happen. Every World Cup, there's always that one story where a so-called weaker team shocks the whole world. Iceland in 2018 is a perfect example of that. I think with more countries involved, we might actually get more of those moments because more fans around the world staying up late, cheering for their home teams, feeling that emotional connection. Maybe the quality from a pure football standpoint might dip a little bit, but the inclusiveness, the emotion, and the global reach of the tournament just all go up.
Right. I think another example is the Club World Cup this summer in the United States, where South American teams really surprised us, like Flamengo, like Palmeiras. They really stunned some European giants. We expected European giants to do well at the tournament, but in the end, some of the European powerhouses were knocked out early, and some South American teams really did well, even reaching the quarterfinals, something like that. We might see something similar next year at the World Cup. Brandon, do you think teams like Cape Verde really can make a splash next summer?
Look, I think the Club World Cup is a fantastic example of, upsets being caused and a shakeup of kind of the world football order. I think for so long, so many people just assumed that European club football was the be-all and end-all, and any other leagues around the world were just kind of kickabout stuff and were not to be taken seriously, and you weren't going to become a seriously, taken professional footballer from, a certain nation unless you made your way over to Europe and proved yourself on that stage. But the Club World Cup, I think, showed that leagues in Saudi Arabia and South America and Asia and other places around the world can actually put together really impressive football teams and can cause some of these European powerhouses a bit of a shock. And who's to say the same thing can't happen at a World Cup? And historically, we have definitely seen multiple World Cup games over the decades where huge shocks have taken place. And, as a South African, where, South Africa will be competing at the World Cup, I am hoping to see upsets. For example, at the 2010 FIFA World Cup, even though I'm devastated that we didn't make it out of the group stages, and it really was touch and go. And I know at that World Cup, France were dealing with so many internal issues and, disasters that were pretty devastating for their chances at that World Cup and were pretty embarrassing for, such a historically successful football nation. I know they've gotten things right since then, but the 2010 World Cup was definitely a stain on France's World Cup performances historically. But that Bafana, South Africa victory over France was a huge upset. even though South Africa were on home soil and France were, in a state of turmoil, that result was immense. And it's something that South African football fans still talk about today. So who's to say Cape Verde can't make a splash like that? And even if it's just one game, if they manage to get one upset victory against a team that is ranked like 50 or 100 places higher than them on the world rankings, and they don't make it out of the qualification groups, and they were kind of like a one and done in terms of World Cup performances. They could, if one game or one victory, even one draw against a massive team, that could be something that country talks about for generations and could inspire future generations of players and teams and so on to take up football and potentially believe that they can go on and be professionals. So are upsets guaranteed? Definitely not. Are they possible? Absolutely. Do I want to see them frequently? No. Do I want to see a few? Absolutely.
Right. Speaking of expansion, the debate isn't stopping at just 48. There's proposal for 64-team World Cup in 2030 to celebrate the tournament's centenary. Interestingly, the hosts of that edition, Spain, Portugal, and Morocco, are pushing back against this idea. So, Tianyu, do you think a 64-team is a step too far, too much?
I wouldn't call the idea crazy, but I do think is a little bit early because we haven't even seen how the 48-team format just will play out yet. So maybe let's test that first before jumping to 64. But the World Cup is already going through big changes. I mean, there's more matches, more travel, more logistics. So I think it makes sense to take things one step at a time. But that said, I think in the long run, I would say expanding to 64 teams is probably where football is heading. The sport is growing very fast in every part of the world. I mean, in Asia, Africa, and North America, and more countries are just getting competitive. So giving them a bigger stage to play on fits the global nature of modern football. And of course, there'll be concerns like player fatigue, longer tournaments, and whether the overall quality might drop. But I think if FIFA can find the right balance, it could make the World Cup even more inclusive and exciting.
Even for the hosts. I mean, Spain, Morocco, and Portugal, they turned down this proposal partly because they cannot handle so many teams at one tournament.
Yeah,
it's a
huge,
huge burden for them.
Yeah.
I don't see any single country can host 64-team World Cup in the future. All right, let's see if the new teams at World Cup family will make shocking runs next summer and whether the expanded World Cup scale will benefit football. With that, we end this episode of Sideline Story. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to Sideline Story wherever you listen to podcasts and leave your comments there. For more information, you can also check our website at radio.cgtn.com. Until next time, stay on the sidelines with us.